Folks, I'm Doug Page with Books by Page, and today I'm speaking with Harvard Business School professor Ranjay Gulati about his new book, How to Be Bold, which details the surprising science of everyday courage. And here is a copy of the book. It's a wonderful read. I think everyone will get a lot out of it. Um, Dr. Gulati, you've had a distinguished career in academics. Professor out there at Northwestern University, the Kellogg School, now at Harvard, and you've written a book here which seemed to be aimed at people, or people in business at least. And yet, in the opening pages, you mentioned faith. In fact, the Dalai Lama wrote the foreword. And I'm just sort of curious, what is it that faith does for leaders, whether they're in business or elsewhere? What is it that it does? Because this seems to be, in many ways, a bit of a unique angle that some folks have not really gone into the way you have.
So let me start from the beginning. So the case the the book starts with the idea of uncertainty.
Right.
It actually starts from the place of fear. That why we struggle to be bold. Actually, if you look at research, it shows that unlike what you see in Hollywood, the default human behavior is one of not courage, it's one of cowardice. We cower in front of fear. So I started there to understand why most of us aren't bold. That led me to discover that the point of origin of fear is uncertainty. That we discover, and what is uncertainty? Uncertainty is not risk. There's another classic distinction there. So as an academic, I need to be a little more precise. So risk is where you know the distribution of outcomes. Uncertainty is where you don't even know. It's unknown, right? As Rumsfeld called it.
Sure.
So you're dealing, and so in those circumstances, uncertainty activates in the human brain the primitive, primal human emotion of fear. It hijacks the amygdala, it clouds the prefrontal cortex, and we can't even think straight.
Right.
Now, you might say it's fight or flight.
Sure.
No, I disagree. Fight is the last option. It's usually freeze or flight. So that's the starting point. That listen, the human we in fact, one of the great books I read was a historical account of cowardice by a famous historian, and he actually had a chapter called "The Good Coward."
Now that seems to be a contradiction in terms.
I know because we tend to vilify cowards. The word coward is a negative label.
Right.
But if you understand it's the normal human response, the human being will freeze or run. Our ancestors, they survived because they ran for cover when they saw a dangerous creature.
Right. Sure.
They didn't go fight the creature.
Right.
So now into this, faith is actually not the whole book. I mean, it's just a small starting point in the book saying that what is the default? How have humans in the past dealt with fear?
Right.
And the idea is that for since cave dweller days, you go back to ancient cave dwellers and look at drawings on walls. Ancient times, cave dwellers relied on a higher power, a higher force. Something will save me. Human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, prayer, rituals, belief systems. These were all. Now, I'm not disagreeing with them in any way. I'm not making a negative remark. I'm saying, along with maybe they work, but they also comfort us,
Right.
right? They calm us down to believe that there's something bigger out there that could take care of me in these very uncertain times.
Right.
So that's the point of origin in saying, how have humans relied on faith as a really powerful resource to kind of comfort them in times of extreme uncertainty? There was weather uncertainty, there was health uncertainty, there was, in those days, enemy uncertainty. There was a lot of uncertainty in which humankind lived, and they needed some way to cope with this uncertainty.
Yeah. Sure. You mentioned in your book too, as well, that being bold does not entail so much a God-given trait or a gene and what have you, but that it's a skill that can be developed. Um, how does someone go off and do something like this? Because I'm thinking when they read your book, if they're a business executive in a large organization, they might have seen lots of fear, from their leaders doing the easy thing, not necessarily doing the bold thing by any means. There's certainly obviously different examples of that. But how can someone go off and develop their ability to say, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to look at this uncertainty out there, and rather than get scared, I'm going to take action, which would be contrary to what I would ordinarily do.
Yeah. So there's a few kind of what I hope are contrarian or hopefully non-obvious insights here.
Sure.
The first one is the word courage is not fearless behavior. It's action in the face of fear. Most humans that I met who did courageous things experienced fear. Nelson Mandela talked about it, saying courage is not the absence of fear, it's taking action in the face of fear.
Right.
So that's just spark that thought. So fear is the fearless imagery that we see in these heroic characters, James Bond, Jason Bourne. These are kind of emotionally numbed characters who don't even experience any form of fear. It's kind of modern myth making that really confuses us. I think it's important to understand that that's the first piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is that courage, and I looked at decades of research in sociology, psychology, economics, neuroscience. I looked at over 200 stories, and I came to realize that courage is learned behavior. That if you're going back to some of the early research of after World War II, they looked at British Army bomb disposal squads and paratroopers. And what they found, and then I looked at fast forward, I saw kamikaze pilots writing the letters they wrote to their mothers the night before they went on their suicide mission. They were scared,
Sure.
right? Then I looked at historical characters like Gandhi and Mandela and others. And what I discovered was that they find not only A, they're taking action in the face of fear, but B, they find they have specific strategies to boost up their courage.
Hmm.
It's not just that they are somehow saying, I'm going to will it, I'm going to do it. There are actual ways in which they resource themselves to bolster their courage. And that's the kind of the central piece of the book, because the idea is that if we all learn from them, courage is accessible to all of us.
Gotcha. Interesting. That's a fascinating thing and all that kind of thing. And probably a lot of people would probably say, that that is not what they've experienced too as well. That, it might not be accessible to them along the way. But, that's obviously changes from person to
But
person, executive to executive.
but that's a key point you're making. That's a very important point. I mean, it's interesting. Winston Churchill said, fear is a reaction, courage is a decision.
Yeah, right.
Another author whose book I just read recently said, the life I'm given is not the one I have to live. And if you look at the research on regret, the people who have studied regret find that if you look in our past, humans have much more regret about inactions rather than actions in their life.
That's interesting that you say that because I've heard that too as well in my own business career that, if nothing else, take action because even if you take the wrong action, at least you've done something, which is going to get you closer to victory than being closer to losing.
So you're now getting into the specific strategies that I talk about in the book about how people embolden or resource themselves. So let me pick on this one that you're
Sure.
describing right now, which I think is a very important point you're picking up on it. I call it comprehension. And the idea is in the face of uncertainty, when it's fog, it's like looking in the fog. You
Right.
don't know what's going on. The temptation is to wait. Let the fog lift. Let me get clarity. After all, you take action after you build a plan.
Mhm.
Well, there was a famous organizational psychologist, Carl Weick at University of Michigan, who said, no, sometimes in uncertainty, you have to walk into the fog and act your way into knowing. You never will get all the information coming to you.
Right.
You got to walk into the fog, and as you walk in, you take cues. And the example he used in his research was a firefighter. A firefighter doesn't just wait outside to get all the data before he or she goes into the building.
Right.
They go, but they don't run into the building recklessly either. They go into the building, they look around, they take cues, they process that, they figure out, hypothesize what's going on, how much time before the building collapses, are there people in the building who have to be saved, are there combustible material, and they adjust as they go.
Right.
So, how do you create the capacity to take small steps into unknowns. One of the examples I use in the book is actually about the plant manager of the Fukushima Daini plant that had major damage from the tsunami. And this is not the plant that had the meltdown that we all know about. That is the Daiichi plant. This is 8 miles away, the other plant
Right.
that also had the same damage.
Right.
But somehow they found a way because of exactly what you said. They took action. Not all right actions, by the way. They calibrated, adjusted,
Right.
recorrected. So it was like improvise their way into the fog.
Right. 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 And if you don't take action, it would seem to me then you're not going to learn how to face this task or this challenge that you've got. I mean, you can talk yourself out of it, right? And say we can't do it that way. Or you can take steps toward figuring out the conundrum. And to do that, you've got to be courageous and bold.
Well, I think it starts. Well, that's the challenge. I think you can build your courage muscle.
Yeah.
So you got to build your courage muscle to do this stuff. So, what I call pushing past your fear, right?
Mhm.
And you're not fearless, you're fearful, but you're willing to work with the fear.
Right.
So, Tom Cruise, who does all his stunts,
Right.
was famously asked, like, don't you feel scared? And he said, I am scared, but I've learned to be okay with being scared. So, how do you then either reduce the fear or outwit the fear? So, I'll give you another example.
Sure.
One of the things I found was most of these courageous characters had a strong team around them.
Mhm.
And they were very intentional about how they used the team to bolster their own courage.
Right.
So they looked for four kinds of support. The first was moral support to make me feel good about myself that you can do it, boss. You got it.
Right.
The second was informational support. They got me valuable information wherever I could find it, right? Then they had resource support. They gave me valuable resources. And the last one was appraisal support. They gave me feedback. So if you look at startups, where high uncertainty, a lot of, challenges along the way, when people talk about having a smart VC with smart money,
Right.
who's going to help them carry them through this chaos, those VCs provide them with money, information, moral support, and feedback. So that was one way. So I call that connection. That, people who are courageous are not alone. They're not solitary characters. They have resourced themselves with a support structure that boosts their courage. I give the example of Frances Haugen in the book,
Right.
who became a whistleblower and essentially, had to take on her entire career in the process. So that's another form of support. I then have four others that I can expound, but I think so. I found that this is not like, okay, go out there, be fearless. It was like, no, find your support network, tiptoe your way into the fog. Another one was, how did they boost their confidence?
Right.
It sounds obvious, but it wasn't just domain skills. It wasn't just like, okay, be the master of your domain.
Right.
It was they boosted their kind of this meta can do attitude. I can do it. So the example I use is Captain Sullenberger, who landed United Airlines flight on the Hudson River. So when Katie Couric interviewed him, said, "Did you know what you had to do?" He said, "Yeah, I knew what I. Nobody had ever done it before. I kind of sort of knew that you had to land the plane above the minimum flying speed, but not too high, nose slightly up,
Right.
wings slightly level, so that they hit the water at the same time, so the plane doesn't flip over. So I had to do all that." And so she says, there was still a big if. And he turned around and looked at her in the eye and said, I knew I could do it.
There you go.
I knew I could do it. So, how do you get that can do spirit going? Navy SEALs train up for that, by the way,
Sure.
right? The can do spirit that, just because you're going into darkness doesn't mean you get scared. You're gonna be scared, but you're gonna still keep moving.
Right. Right.
So that's how do you resource, how do you train? Another one I found was conviction.
Mhm.
How do you build real moral conviction about something you believe in?
Right.
Many startups, again, will kind of create this, we're here to change the world, we're going to transform this market, we're going to really do this differently. It's not about saving the planet necessarily. It doesn't have to be a noble ambition like I want to do something. It could be just, I want to just transform the way this is done. Netflix said, we want to transform entertainment.
Right.
That's what we're here for. We're not here to ship DVDs. We're not here to do a subscription model. We want to transform how entertainment is consumed.
Right.
Now they're saying we want to transform the very notion of entertainment. So, how do you imagine possibilities? So, that's another one, conviction.
Right.
The last one I talk about is calm. How, when you're dealing with a fearful situation, how do you deal, and hot heads versus cool minds, you gotta like, how do you stay calm? And I discovered very interesting examples. Adele, famous singer,
Sure.
turns out she gets scared when she performs. She does a ritual. She takes a picture of Celine Dion, whom she worships,
Yeah.
and looks at it before she goes on stage. So I interviewed a Ukrainian commando
Right.
who said that every morning his team does a ritual just to bring good luck,
Right.
right? Others, Katie Ledecky, famous athlete, gets nervous when she has to swim.
Right.
She recites her grandmother's name in her head repeatedly to calm herself down.
Right.
That's called redirection. Or you look at Simone Biles, who withdrew from the Tokyo Olympics because she got the twisties.
Yeah.
She was too scared. Or you look at Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, who uses humor. Okay, he was a comedian before,
That's right.
right? But the comedy scene in Ukraine is thriving. People use humor. So these are all ways to stay calm. So these are just under one chapter of calm. So the idea of all these chapters is people who are courageous aren't just crazy, foolhardy, reckless people,
Right.
nor are they emotionally numb to fear. But somehow, by luck or somehow, they found a way to resource themselves.
It sounds like what you're describing is something that perhaps many people would not expect to hear, which is you're describing someone who's all too human and yet is figuring out a way to control their worst instincts, which is to be scared, so scared that they can't take action, but has found a way to calm their fears, whether it's through humor, whether it's through some sort of faith, whether it's a conviction that they've got, being prepared, as you described, the firefighter, for example, or somebody who's working with a VC on their own business startup, that they have found a way then that way to go ahead and say, okay, this is how I can minimize my fears, yet still be cautious and still go forward at the same time.
Exactly. I think the idea is courage is not the purview of some exclusive elite people who are congenitally courageous. I think it's for all of us. I think most of the people I found, I mean, I'll just give you one or two examples that might illustrate this point to you.
Sure.
Um, and that might maybe help you see what I'm talking about here. Look at Brandon Say.
Okay.
Brandon Say was a cashier at a dance hall in California.
Yep.
It was his grandmother's dance hall, and after she passed away, she gave it to her mother, his mother, and after his mother passed away, he was running it.
Right.
Right? On a typical evening, people are dancing over there in the evening. He doesn't know that some gentleman has gone to another dance hall and shot up the place with a machine gun
Right.
and has now arrived at his dance hall. And so he sees this guy walk in with a gun. Now, Brandon told me that he was the most mild mannered, and you see him, he's very mild, pacifist, docile, whatever words come to your mind. In fact, he and a friend of his at one point even joked, what would we do if we met a mass shooter? And they both agreed they would duck or run for cover.
Yeah.
So his first instinct was maybe he'll hide under the table,
Sure.
right? And maybe the gunman won't see him. And
Right.
he'll go inside and shoot up the place, but, at least he would survive.
Right.
But the next thing you know, what he finds is he's out there fighting with the gunman.
Yeah.
And the gunman is punching him in the face, but because he's punching him with one hand, this guy manages to pull away the gun and points the gun at the gunman and makes him run away.
Yeah.
Now, at one level, you might say this is a cost benefit analysis.
Sure.
He did a cost benefit analysis and he thought that I'm going to get found anyway. The guy's going to shoot me anyway. Fight or flight. Flight was not an option, so fight was the answer.
Right.
And that's what the media portrayed him as, a heroic character. Wow, the hero, the governor of California, the president of the United States. Everyone's kind of, fating this guy and inviting him. When I interviewed him, I asked him, I said, tell me what got you into you. And he's like, I honestly don't know. But now that I think about it, you know, I was thinking my mother, who made all these sacrifices for me, she's up there looking, wherever she is, and I'm hiding under a table and I'm going to die without even giving it a fight. And everyone who's in the dance hall are people I've known since I was a kid. I mean, this is my family. I'm the custodian for and I'm going to hide. So there was this sensibility in him that had awoken. Now, it was in the moment.
Yeah.
And many of the examples we're using right now are kind of instantaneous, and then you just figure out what was I doing. But many of the other ones I found were very long-term planning. You
Mm.
know, Frances Haugen took 1 year before she became a whistleblower. Philippe Petit, who does the tightrope walks across big buildings, who did
Yep.
the Grand Canyon and the World Trade Center, he spent 12 years planning the walk across the Grand Canyon.
Mm.
So courage can happen in the moment,
Yep.
but you see, all these are ordinary characters.
Right.
They're resourcing themselves somehow, sometimes spontaneously in the moment,
Yeah.
you know, or not. So Captain Sullenberger was okay, fine. He was a fighter pilot in his youth, but for 40 years he had flown commercial aircrafts, taking off, landing. He never planned to crash a plane.
Right. Good.
Bang. So what can we learn from them that might help us live more courageous lives?
Right.
That, I think, is the question. Now, I should tell you, the last one third of the book is about courageous organizations, collective courage.
Sure.
So the first two thirds is about individual courage, and then I get to collective courage and how do you do that for organizations.